The smell of roasted lamb wafted through the marble halls of the Whitmore estate, mingling with the faint citrus polish of spotless floors. Chandeliers glimmered like frozen fireworks above a dining table big enough to host a royal banquet. Yet tonight, only one woman sat there, a queen without joy, framed by silence. Victoria Whitmore adjusted the silk shawl over her shoulders, her manicured fingers tapping against the rim of a crystal goblet. Beyond the glass walls stretched acres of manicured gardens, fountains glowing under the Arizona sunset. Beauty everywhere, and yet she felt nothing. She hated silence, almost as much as she hated the wheelchair beneath her. 8 years chained to this elegant prison. 8 years of depending on others for everything. For someone like Victoria, who once controlled boardrooms with the flick of her wrist, this immobility was worse than death. "Dinner's served, Mrs. Whitmore," said Marlene, her housekeeper, laying down a plate of braised lamb, truffle mashed potatoes, and sautéed asparagus. A meal worth more than most families' weekly groceries. Victoria didn't even glance at it. "Take it away," she muttered coldly. "Not hungry." The words cut through the boy standing at the back door like shards of glass. Daniel Thompson had been watching for 3 nights now from across the narrow street that divided opulence from poverty. Each night, he saw the same ritual. Dishes piled high, untouched, then tossed into the trash like they were worthless. And every night, his grandmother ate a smaller dinner so he could have more. Tonight, Daniel couldn't stand it any longer. The knock on the service entrance was soft at first, barely there. Marlene frowned, setting down the silver tray before disappearing toward the sound. When she opened the door, her brows knitted tighter than the bun in her hair. A boy stood there, skin the color of dark chocolate, clothes worn thin, sneakers frayed at the seams. But his posture, it was straight, proud, like someone who refused to bend, even when the world demanded it. "Yes?" Marlene's tone was brisk, dismissive. "Please," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. "I need to speak with Mrs. Whitmore." The housekeeper almost laughed. "About what? Charity? Go to a shelter." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not charity. A deal." The steel in his voice made Marlene hesitate. She glanced back toward the dining room, where Victoria's sharp tone rang out. "Who is it?" "Some boy." Marlene replied reluctantly. "Send him in." "I could use some entertainment," Victoria said, her voice dripping disdain. And just like that, the gates opened not to kindness, but to a battlefield neither of them saw coming. Victoria Whitmore sat like an empress in exile, her icy blue eyes sweeping over the boy who dared cross her threshold. She smirked. "Well, you have 2 minutes before I decide this was a mistake." Daniel took one step forward, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I can cure you," he said evenly. "I can make you walk again." The laugh that burst from Victoria's lips was sharp and cruel, echoing off the marble walls. "Cure me?" she repeated, her voice slicing through the air. "Listen, little boy. I've spent $15 million on the best doctors money can buy. For 8 years. Do you really think some slum kid with, what? Herbs and prayers? Can do what world-class neurosurgeons couldn't?" Daniel didn't blink. Yes. The audacity stole her breath for half a second. Then she tilted her head, eyes glinting with contempt. "And what do you want in return for this?" "Miracle. Your leftovers," Daniel said simply. "The food you throw away every day." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Victoria laughed again, louder this time, a sound like shattering glass. "You're insane." "Maybe," Daniel said quietly. "But maybe I'm your only chance." Victoria was about to order him out when Daniel spoke again, his words sliding under her armor like a blade. "You take medicine for back pain every day at 2 in the afternoon. 3 white pills, 1 blue. You complain your legs feel cold, even when the house is warm." Her smirk faltered, just slightly. How do you know that? Daniel didn't smile. Because I pay attention. Something your expensive doctors don't. For the first time in years, Victoria felt something she didn't recognize immediately. Fear. Not of the boy, of the truth in his voice. Before she could respond, Daniel turned and walked toward the door. Think about it, he said softly. I'll come back tomorrow. The door shut behind him, leaving Victoria in a silence that suddenly felt dangerous. That night, Victoria sat in her dimly lit bedroom, staring out the window at the flickering lights of Riverside Gardens, the housing complex across the street where the boy lived, a world away. Yet only 300 feet from her iron gates. Who was he? How did he know? She told herself it didn't matter. And yet, for the first time in 8 years, she couldn't sleep, because deep down, in the cold chambers of her guarded heart, a whisper had taken root, a whisper she hated. What if he's right? By sunrise, Victoria's curiosity had curdled into obsession. She sat in her glass-walled study, scrolling through the glowing screen of her tablet. One call to her private investigator had been enough to peel back the layers of Daniel Thompson's life. 12 years old. Lives with grandmother Ruth Thompson in Riverside Gardens. Mother dead in a car accident. Father unknown. Straight A student on a scholarship. No criminal record. Model child, the report read. But Victoria's eyes snagged on one line. Grandmother, Ruth Thompson. Former hospital employee. Retired after disability. Unexpected clinical recovery, 2 years ago. Victoria frowned. Recovery from what? She tapped her manicured nails against the desk, irritation prickling under her skin. A bureaucratic error, surely. What could an old black woman from a public hospital know that her own battalion of specialists didn't? And yet, the thought lodged in her mind like a splinter. Meanwhile, Daniel sat on a rickety porch chair across the street, his grandmother beside him, a chipped mug of tea in her hands. The air smelled of fried onions and damp asphalt. Grandma, he said softly. Tell me again about the signs of pseudo-paralysis. Ruth's eyes, the color of worn mahogany, gleamed with a wisdom books couldn't teach. It's all in the mind, boy. Trauma freezes the soul first, then the body follows. Legs stop moving when the heart won't. Daniel nodded slowly. He had seen it in Victoria, the tiny twitches when she was angry, the tension in her calves when she thought no one was watching. The doctors had missed it. He hadn't. She's locked in her own prison. Daniel murmured. Ruth smiled sadly. And you think you can break her out? Yes, Daniel whispered. But first, I need her to believe I can. The next day, Victoria called the headmaster of Daniel's school. Her voice was sugar over poison. Principal Patterson? This is Victoria Whitmore. I'd like to discuss a troubling incident involving one of your scholarship students. By afternoon, Daniel was sitting in the principal's office, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Patterson's words were clipped. Mrs. Whitmore claims you've been harassing her staff and trespassing on private property. One more complaint, Daniel, and your scholarship is gone. Daniel walked home under a sky bruised with clouds, his jaw tight, his mind racing. She was trying to crush him the only way she knew how, through power, through fear. When he told Ruth, she didn't flinch. Boy, she said calmly, pouring tea. When rich folks are scared, they fight dirty. But fear means you've already touched a nerve. Keep going. That night, Daniel sat at an old desktop in the school library, long after the janitor had finished mopping the floors. The glow of the screen bathed his face as he dug deeper into Victoria's past. And what he found changed everything. Victoria Kowalski. Not Whitmore. Born poor, daughter of Polish immigrants. Married Harrison Whitmore, the man who had inherited a fortune built on the backs of enslaved people. The accident that paralyzed her? It happened one day after she discovered Harrison was divorcing her for a younger woman. 2 years later, Harrison was dead. Heart attack, the record said. But Daniel's instincts screamed otherwise. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through digitized medical files, old court records, and whispered scandals buried under NDAs. He didn't just find lies, he found rot. And he knew with bone-deep certainty. Victoria wasn't sick. She was hiding. When Daniel told Ruth what he had learned, her expression didn't change, but her eyes darkened. "She's afraid you'll expose her," Ruth said quietly. "That's why she's fighting so hard. But listen to me, boy. Our gift isn't for revenge. It's for healing." "I know," Daniel said, his voice steady. "But sometimes, the truth is the only medicine that works." He looked out the window at the mansion glowing across the street, like a ship made of light. "She thinks I'm just a hungry kid," Daniel whispered. "She has no idea I'm about to turn her whole world upside down." Victoria Whitmore sat in her marble bathroom that night, the mirror throwing back a reflection she could barely stand to look at. Her manicured hands gripped the edge of the sink until her knuckles whitened. How dare that boy? How dare some slum child march up to her door, eyes steady, voice calm, and claim he could do what the greatest neurologists in the world had failed to? Her fury was a thin veil over something she didn't want to name. Fear. Because the words that boy spoke, the details he knew, no one should have known. The exact pills, the timing, the coldness in her legs. Her chest tightened as she remembered Dr. Hartwell's hesitant voice days earlier. "Your nervous system shows normal activity, Victoria. There's no physical reason for your paralysis," she had screamed at him then. But now, those words returned like ghosts. Daniel didn't knock on the side door this time. He walked up the main path, past the iron gates, under the glare of cameras that blinked red like unblinking eyes. He rang the front bell sharp, loud, deliberate. The butler opened it, stiff and skeptical. "Yes? I'm here to see Mrs. Whitmore," Daniel said evenly. "Tell her it's about her legs." Minutes later, Victoria rolled into the grand foyer like a queen on wheels. Her eyes were cold fire. "You don't learn, do you?" she snapped. "Whatever fantasy you've spun in that little head of yours," Daniel's voice cut through hers, calm and surgical. "You twitch your right foot when you're angry." Her mouth went dry. "And when you cry alone," Daniel continued softly, "you forget to keep your knees stiff." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's lips parted, but no words came. "Your body works, Mrs. Whitmore," Daniel said, stepping closer. "The prison is in your mind, and I can open the door." Her voice came out as a rasp. "Get out." Daniel held her gaze, unblinking. "One day," he said quietly, "you'll beg me to come back." He turned and walked away, leaving Victoria trembling in a silence that felt louder than her anger. That night, Ruth sat with Daniel in their cramped kitchen, the hum of the old fridge filling the pauses between her words. "You've started a war, boy," she said softly, stirring her tea. Daniel's jaw tightened. "She drew first blood, Grandma. She called the school. She wants me gone. And now you've wounded her pride," Ruth murmured. "The most dangerous wound there is." Daniel looked out the window at the mansion glowing like a false god in the night. "I don't care," he said, voice hard. "I'm not afraid of her money. I'm not afraid of her power. She's hiding behind a lie, and I'm going to tear it down." Ruth studied him, her eyes deep pools of warning and pride. "Then you'd better be ready for what happens when that lie starts to bleed." 2 mornings later, the storm hit. Daniel arrived at school to find whispers curling through the hallways like smoke. Screenshots of a neighborhood alert were everywhere. Beware. Local boy seen approaching private properties, possibly casing homes. Report any suspicious behavior immediately. His stomach clenched. His scholarship, the only ladder out of the pit, was now hanging by a thread. By the time he reached home that afternoon, a letter was taped to their apartment door. Final notice of lease violation. Ruth read it slowly, her hands steady, even as her jaw tightened. "She's pulling every string," she murmured, "trying to choke us out." Daniel sat down hard, fury boiling under his skin. "She wants a fight?" he whispered. "Then she'll get one." That night, in her sprawling bedroom of silk and glass, Victoria poured herself a drink with shaking hands. She hated the taste of whiskey, but tonight she needed fire in her veins, because for the first time in years, she had felt it movement. A flicker in her legs when that boy had spoken, his voice sharp as a scalpel cutting through her lies. She threw back the drink and stared at her reflection. "He doesn't matter," she hissed. "He's nothing," but in the dark corners of her mind, a voice she couldn't silence whispered back, "Then why are you so afraid?" Victoria Whitmore did not just strike back, she detonated. Within days, Daniel's world became a battlefield. First, the school principal called him in. The man's voice was flat, rehearsed. "Daniel, there have been concerning reports, trespassing, harassing residents. This kind of behavior puts your scholarship in jeopardy." Daniel sat stiff in the chair, fists clenched under the desk. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly. The principal's tone dripped with condescension. "Stay in your lane, son. Don't make trouble for people above your station." Above your station. The words burned like acid. That night, Daniel threw the notice on the kitchen table so hard the chipped wood rattled. She called the superintendent. She called the school. "She wants me gone, Grandma." His voice cracked, not with fear, but with fury. Ruth looked at him calmly, like a storm looking at lightning. "Good," she said softly. Daniel blinked. "Good?" "Good," Ruth repeated. "Because fear makes the powerful sloppy. They make mistakes when they're desperate. And that, boy, is when you strike." Her wrinkled hand rested over his clenched fist. "You were born for this fight. Not for revenge, but for truth. And truth always finds its way through cracks." Daniel began to dig not with shovels, but with questions, quiet searches, whispers that slid through the cracks of privilege. Late nights at the library, old archives, property records. What he found made his blood run cold. Victoria Whitmore had not been born a Whitmore. Her real name was Victoria Kowalski, the daughter of poor Polish immigrants. She married Harrison Whitmore, the heir to a steel empire, barely 3 months after discovering his affair. The accident that left her paralyzed. It happened one day after Harrison filed for divorce. And the final blow, Harrison's death. Officially a heart attack. But the hospital report showed anomalies. Elevated digoxin levels. A drug derived from foxglove, a slow, nearly undetectable poison. Daniel sat in the glow of the library lamp, heart hammering. This wasn't just about paralysis anymore. This was about lies so big they could topple empires. Victoria stared at her reflection in the gold-framed mirror, whiskey glass trembling in her hand. 8 years. 8 long years of this chair. Of silence. Of pretending. She could still feel it sometimes, the treadmill under her feet in the basement gym, the burn in her muscles when no one was watching. Her secret was a living thing, breathing in the dark corners of her mansion. A secret that boy was circling like a predator that smelled blood. When Daniel returned home with the documents, Ruth read them in silence. Her face did not change, but her eyes held storms. "Do you know what this means, Grandma?" Daniel asked. "It means she's built her empire on rot," Ruth said. "And rot always collapses." Then her voice softened, but her words cut like scripture. "But boy, don't let your heart rot with it. We fight to heal, not to destroy, even when the patient is the disease." Daniel swallowed hard. "She doesn't deserve healing." Ruth's gaze pinned him. "No one deserves it. That's why it's called grace. And grace is the sharpest weapon we have. Daniel's plan crystallized like frost under moonlight. He wrote a note on plain paper. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., your front door. If you want to walk again, don't be late. He slid it under her massive iron gates, like a whisper of judgment. Victoria read it that night, hands trembling. Her pride screamed to tear it to pieces. But something deeper, something older than her anger, made her fold it carefully and place it on the nightstand, like a prayer she didn't believe in yet. The air outside the Whitmore mansion was heavy with tension. Clouds rolled low like gray beasts, promising a storm. Victoria sat in her wheelchair, staring at the door, the note Daniel left burning in her mind like scripture. Her manicured nails drummed against the armrest. He thinks he can control me, she whispered. A boy from the slums? But deep inside, something whispered louder. What if he's right? At 10 o'clock sharp, the sound came. 3 knocks, solid, unyielding. Victoria's pulse quickened. She wheeled herself to the door, her pride pulling the handle instead of calling staff. When the door swung open, she froze. Daniel stood there, his frame straight as an arrow, eyes calm but sharp as broken glass. Beside him was Ruth, her presence radiating quiet authority, and with them, Dr. Patricia Williams. The neurologist, Victoria, had paid millions to keep silent. Victoria's stomach twisted. What is this? She snapped, trying to sound commanding. It came out thin, almost brittle. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady, almost gentle, but every syllable landed like a hammer on marble. Good morning, Victoria Kowalski. Her blood turned to ice. No one had spoken that name in decades. You think money erases the past? Daniel continued, pulling a worn leather folder from his bag. Birth certificate, marriage license, bank transfers, everything about who you were before you became Mrs. Whitmore. Victoria's lips trembled. You have no right. I have every right, Daniel cut in, his voice rising for the first time. Because you tried to destroy my life, my home, my future. And all because you couldn't stand the truth staring you in the face. Dr. Williams shifted uncomfortably, her guilt etched into the lines around her mouth. Victoria, she said quietly, your paralysis was never physical. Every test showed normal neural activity. The truth is, shut up, Victoria roared, her voice cracking like dry timber. But Daniel pressed on, relentless. You paid her to lie, to confirm a fake diagnosis, so you could stay the victim, so you could keep the Whitmore fortune. Daniel reached into his bag again, this time pulling a USB stick. He held it between 2 fingers like a blade. Phone calls, bank transfers, recordings of you begging her to confirm your condition. And the best part? Evidence of what you did to Harrison. Victoria's skin went gray. You, digitalis, Daniel said calmly. Foxglove extract, slow, silent, perfect for simulating a heart attack, almost impossible to trace unless someone knows where to look. Ruth stepped forward, her voice like rolling thunder. You killed a man to keep his money, and then you caged yourself in that chair, thinking you could bury the guilt with marble floors and gold mirrors. But the rot always rises. Victoria's hands shook violently on the armrests. You can't prove. Daniel tapped his phone screen. A video sprang to life on the portable speaker. Victoria, walking in her private gym at 3 a.m. Another clip dancing barefoot in her study. Another shoving the wheelchair aside to grab a bottle from the top shelf. Her own voice filled the room. If Harrison finds out I can walk, I lose everything. Keep confirming the diagnosis, and I'll double your fee. Dr. Williams dropped her head in shame. Ruth folded her arms, eyes like steel. Daniel stepped closer until his shadow fell across her. His voice was low, cold, and absolute. Stand up. Victoria flinched. I can't stand, Daniel thundered. Enough lies. Her breath came in sharp gasps. And then, like a puppet on invisible strings, she rose. Slowly, shakily. The chair screeched against the marble as she pushed away from it. For 8 years, she had played the part of a prisoner. Now the truth stood naked, trembling on 2 legs. Ruth's voice cut through the silence. Congratulations, you're cured. And condemned. Sirens wailed in the distance. Daniel turned toward the door calmly, pulling a final envelope from his bag. These, he said, dropping it on the glass coffee table with a soft thud, are the reports going to the FBI, the IRS, and the media. Insurance fraud, tax evasion, medical conspiracy, and yes, first-degree murder. Victoria's eyes darted wildly. You wouldn't. I would, Daniel said softly. And I have. By now, the Washington Post and CNN already have the files. By nightfall, America will know the truth about Victoria Whitmore, the fake paralytic who murdered her husband for money. As the blue and red lights flashed across the Whitmore gates, Victoria collapsed back into her chair, not because she needed it, but because her strength was gone. You ruined me, she whispered. Daniel stared down at her, his voice calm and devastating. Number. You ruined yourself. The day you decided a lie was easier than the truth. He turned toward the door, Ruth's steady hand on his shoulder. Before stepping out, he looked back one last time. You wanted to destroy a boy for being poor. Instead, that boy destroyed your empire for being rotten. And with that, Daniel walked into the sunlight, a storm behind him, and a future brighter than the gilded cage he had just burned to ashes. By the next morning, every major news outlet carried the story. Millionaire fake paralytic arrested. Years of fraud, murder, and lies exposed by one 2-year-old boy. Victoria Whitmore's name dominated the news cycle. Commentators dissected her fall from grace on talk shows, hashtags trended globally, and social media exploded with memes. Walk of Shame trended worldwide, alongside photos of Victoria standing from her wheelchair during her arrest. But beneath the sensational headlines lay the real story, a boy from a slum who dismantled a billion-dollar empire, armed with nothing but observation, intelligence, and ancestral wisdom. 6 months later, the mansion that had once been a monument to greed became a sanctuary for hope. The Ruth Thompson Community Center for Healing and Education opened its doors to hundreds of children from Riverside Gardens and beyond. Its walls, once lined with priceless art, now displayed murals painted by kids who had never seen a brush before. The grand ballroom, where Victoria hosted elitist galas, became a library with shelves stacked floor to ceiling. Daniel insisted on one golden rule: no one pays a dime. Every child would learn, eat, and grow without the chains of poverty tightening around their dreams. At 14, Daniel became the youngest full scholarship student in Harvard's history. Cameras followed him as he stepped onto campus, but he waved them off. Fame doesn't heal anyone, he told a reporter. Knowledge does. He turned down lucrative book deals and television offers, dedicating his energy to studying medicine while continuing the family legacy of healing, a legacy he now merged with science. But every evening, Daniel video called Ruth, who ran the community center with pride and discipline. Boy, she teased one night, don't let those fancy professors forget who really taught you. Daniel laughed. I never will, Grandma. Prison stripped Victoria of everything: wealth, power, and illusion. The woman who once discarded meals that could feed 10 families now fought for a tray of watery soup. Her $15,000 custom wheelchair was replaced by a dented metal chair from the prison infirmary. For the first time in decades, she faced the silence of her own choices. When fellow inmates asked how a woman like her ended up here, she muttered the truth she could no longer outrun. I underestimated the wrong person. Victoria developed genuine muscle atrophy, After months of confinement, a bitter irony that made headlines again. Victoria Whitmore, finally paralyzed for real. One rainy afternoon, Daniel walked into the federal penitentiary for the first and last time. Victoria stared at him through the bulletproof glass, her once icy eyes dull and hollow. "Why did you come?" she whispered. Daniel's voice was calm, his presence radiating strength. "To make sure you understood something. I never wanted to destroy you. I wanted you to stop destroying us. You were just a boy," she murmured. "And you were a woman with everything," Daniel replied. Who really should have known better? For the first time, Victoria lowered her gaze, not out of shame, but out of recognition. Daniel's story became a global phenomenon, a case study in Ivy League ethics classes, a documentary that won international awards, and the basis of education programs aimed at identifying talent in underserved communities. The Daniel Thompson effect redefined how society measured intelligence, not by privilege, but by resilience. When asked what he wanted most after changing the world, Daniel gave the same answer every time. "I want a world where kids like me don't have to fight so hard to be seen." On a warm summer evening, Daniel returned to the mansion-turned-community center. Children ran barefoot across the sprawling lawn, laughter echoing through corridors that once smelled of arrogance. He stood beside Ruth as the sun dipped below the horizon. "You built something beautiful, boy," she said softly. "No," Daniel thought, watching the kids paint rainbows on the walls. "We built this." And in that moment, the story came full circle from a boy asking for leftovers to a young man serving up futures. Because the greatest wealth was never money. It was knowledge, and the courage to use it for something bigger than yourself.